Lynne, you introduce Anne and go with it.
Yeah, so I work with and for Anne Saylor. She's been teaching music together since 2004, Anne, is that right?
Sure.
I think so. And then, and she is now the director and the owner of West Essex Music Together, which is in the area. She also, because Music Together started at Montclair Co-op 40 years ago,
Yeah, probably.
and now is international across the entire world. We're in Asia, we're in Australia, we're in Europe, many, many places. And so Anne works for the central hub called Music Together Worldwide. She is a program developer, a teacher trainer, a workshop leader. What else did I miss?
That's it. That's it.
So Anne does a lot with music individually. She still teaches, and she does a lot with teachers all over the world. And therefore families all over the world. And so we really wanted to come. We were joking with Shirley before all of you signed on that we could talk about music and the brain for a long time. So let's just get right to it. If you guys could mute yourselves.
Everybody's muted.
Okay, everybody's muted. We're gonna get right into it. Can you guys follow along with me? הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב, הנה מה טוב. ידעי דה 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 דה. הנה מה טוב, הנה מה טוב. ידעי דה 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 דה. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב, הנה מה טוב. Yadadai da 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 da. Hine matov, hine matov. Yadadai da 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 da. Hine matov umanaim. Shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov umanaim. Shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov, hine matov. Yadadai da 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 da. Hine matov, hine matov. Yadadai da 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 da. Hine matov umanaim. Shevet achim gam yachad. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב, הנה מה טוב. ידעי דה 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 דה. הנה מה טוב, הנה מה טוב. ידעי דה 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 דה. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב, הנה מה טוב. ידעי דה 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 דה. הנה מה טוב, הנה מה טוב. ידעי דה 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 da 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 da. Let's start at the beginning. Anne and I are gonna, mostly Anne is gonna tell you many things about what just happened to our brains or with our brains while we were making music together. But starting at the beginning, babies, actually children within the first 3 years of life, our human brain grows exponentially. It grows a lot and it grows very quickly. And infants in the first year of life are known to make up to 700 neural connections, neural pathways, 700 per second. That's a lot of information. And so our brain needs to determine how much of it we can hold on to because we need to make room for all the other experiences and everything. So how the brain does that, right? The brain decides what information is important that we'll keep and what neural connections are not important that we won't keep. The brain decides that from experience. So our experiences shape our neural pathways. They shape our brain for learning way into the future from the beginning. We, in classes, we talk about neural pathway creation being like forging a path through the forest. So if you forge a path through the forest and you walk along that path and you go back and forth, the path becomes distinct and clear and very easy to travel. If you make a path in the woods and then you don't really go back that way for a while, the vegetation takes over and the path becomes less clear and less easy to navigate. So it's that whole idea of use it or lose it, right? So our brain is making all these connections. We can't keep them all. What's important? Music musical experiences, making music, activates and integrates multiple parts of our brain. And so therefore music can enhance learning, but anytime we experience and we learn with music, through music, make music, we are supporting brain growth throughout multiple domains. So another thing we say in class all the time is music learning supports all learning. And again, that's because of the different activities, the different areas that light up. And Anne, I'm going to throw it over to you now so you can continue that thought.
Sure. Yeah. In fact, Lynn, just building on what you have just said, we have all learned at least something through music over our lives. I mean, we've certainly learned the A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? We know the alphabet because we sang a song about it first. Some of you may have learned the state capitals or the president's names because of music. I actually learned, I was sharing this with Lynne the other day, that back in the 1970s, who remembers Schoolhouse Rock? Anybody remember Schoolhouse Rock? Right, Liza? Right. So I Saturday morning, I had my cartoons, and between the cartoons were these Schoolhouse Rock little, mini cartoons where we learned things like counting by threes or what adjectives were and adverbs and all that stuff. I can today sing the entire preamble of the Constitution of the United States of America because I learned it on one of these crazy little songs, right? Adrian, are you like, we the people in order to form a work, right? It's bonkers that I can still do that at 53. So it's because of music. It's because I learned it through music. And it wasn't like I was in a class where a teacher taught me formally this song. I heard it, I absorbed it, I took it in over the course of multiple repetitions, and it landed. And here is one of the reasons that it landed so deeply. And I'm going to share my screen. You all can see my screen right now? Okay. So when we have music experiences, and when I don't want to say music experiences does not mean singing in a choir or playing violin. It means you're 5 years old and you're sitting on grandpa's lap as he's singing a song from his childhood or from services the other day or whatever it is, right? He's singing a song. Or I am lying on the floor watching Schoolhouse Rock between cartoons, or I'm in school and I'm singing with a classroom teacher, or whatever. I'm singing along with the radio. I'm in the kitchen and mom is singing while we're making pasta together, whatever it is. So as we are engaged in these music experiences, one of the things about music that is unique is that it is processed and energizes multiple areas of the brain at the same time. Nothing else really does that to this extent. Language is processed in a couple of parts of the brain. Movement is processed in a couple of parts of the brain. Sound is processed in a primary part of the brain. But multiple areas of the brain are activated during music experiences. And that's not something that we can control. That's automatic, it's reflexive. So, for example, I'm gonna, let's see, I'm just gonna try to use one of the little Zoom pointers, but of course here, if I do this, can you see my little pointer? Yes, so right here, right, the auditory cortex, obviously, that's when we have auditory information coming in, it's processed in the auditory cortex of the brain. It's where sound is processed. That makes sense, right? That we have, that when we're listening to music, the auditory cortex is activated. But in addition, when we were just doing this song with Lynne, our sensory cortex was also being activated. Part of it is because we are taking in information through our ears, that sense, but also tactile information is coming in. We're clapping left and right. We're using up the top part of our body and tapping down to the lower parts of our bodies. As this information is coming in, that part of our brain is also being activated. Because there's movement involved, we're also generating information in the motor cortex, where again, we're moving. And not only are we processing the tactile information, processing the motor information, but we're also processing something called the proprioceptive information. And proprioception is, here I am in space, and here's my computer in space, right? So my computer's right here, and I'm over here. How I know the distance just intuitively between myself and the computer, or between myself and that back wall, or between myself and the floor or the ceiling, how I know that is about proprioception. It's where I exist in space. And that is also amplified by music, because I mean, one of the things we're doing is we're moving, our bodies through space. But as we are making sound, our sound waves are bouncing off of the walls around us and feeding back information into our brains about where we exist in space. So that's also happening. That then involves not only those other cortices, but also the cerebellum. The cerebellum here, it also talks about not only moving, but emotions. I actually love to think about the fact that there's a place in our brain that is where we process movement and emotion. And it makes so much sense that when we are dealing with emotion, we are also dealing with where it is in our body and how our body moves to it. I always think about, when it just happened earlier when Shirley was sharing with us a story of somebody who said, well, someone said, I can't sing. And then someone else said, oh, it pains me to hear you say that. And what I did automatically is I grabbed my heart. Because that is how I felt that, right? And whenever something like that happens in my body, I go, oh, that's my cerebellum. Right? I'm not only processing that emotion, but I'm also moving as a part of that emotional processing. That happens during music, because music is one of the primary ways that we integrate emotional information, right? All of us at one point have turned to a breakup song at the end of a relationship, or a song at a wedding if we have a loved one who's getting married, and then there's a song at the wedding that just brings tears, and with like tears are rolling down our cheeks, right? That experience is because the music is helping us to find a way to hold space for the strong emotions about that particular life transition, or about the emotional information that's held there. A friend of mine lived in New York City right at when 9/11 happened, and one of the things that she said that was the most remarkable thing was the next day people just went out into the streets and gathered and started singing together. And it was the way that they had to be able to pull that emotional information in, as in this incredibly challenging time, right? So more that's going on in the brain there. Yeah.
So I just want to interject that I tell people this all the time. This is one of my favorite factoids about music and the brain, is that studies have been done. Professionals have looked at the scans of people's brains. And the professionals who looked at these scans cannot determine, by looking at the scans alone, they cannot tell the doctor from the carpenter. They cannot tell the teacher from the aerospace engineer. They can, however, look at a scan of a brain and say, that's a musician, and be right every single time. And again, what Anne is just showing you, it's because that these people who do make music as a profession, their brains are wired. So many parts of their brains are active and lit up. I just think that's
Oh my gosh.
an amazing fact. And, we are not, most of us, professional musicians, but when we make music, we sort of touch at that a little bit. So we are lighting up our brains. Thanks, Anne.
Absolutely. And the difference is that the people who make music as a job, and who are doing that every day, all day long, like we do our jobs every day, all day long, it's like it's like a bodybuilder, right? Those parts of the brain that are stimulated more, they just have more. They have more neurochemicals who go to those parts of the brain. They have just more interconnectivity between neurons. More of their synapses are stronger, and so they're beefier sections. and because music, it happens in multiple locations of the brain, more of that gray matter, white matter is stimulated, and more of it grows for a practicing musician. That is and that's one of the, Lynne, one of the things behind that is that the corpus callosum, which is like the center stem between the two halves of our brain, the left brain and the right brain, that is a part of the brain where information from one side comes through and goes to the other side, and information from the other side comes through and goes. It's like a hub of interconnectivity that is super strengthened, super synchronized during music experiences. All right, I'm going to stop my share because I want to see you guys. It's bothersome to be able to just looking at that brain the whole time. So you get it, right? The so much information is happening in the brain at the same time. There are a couple of things. And by the way, this is not just in children, right? That's the other thing, is it starts in childhood. It actually starts in utero. 16 weeks gestation is when the hearing starts to become activated. So from the time that a baby is about 4 months, not a baby, but a fetus is about 4 months in gestation. There is hearing, and then that continues to develop as they mature in the womb. And then when they are born, babies are born being able to recognize musical sound, being able to recognize speech sound, being able to recognize other kinds of sounds. And in fact, in an infant brain, the difference between language and music processing is almost non-existent. And in addition, as babies grow over the first year, the difference between language and music expression is also non-existent. It's all just kind of a fluid flow. So we've seen in our lab school, where we have families who come in and do class with us from infancy, from birth on, we have seen infants as early as 10 days old toning on the same pitches of the songs that we're singing. So if we're singing a song in D major, right? So, and I have no pitch pipe here, Lynne, so I can't even say, do you have a D someplace?
I do.
By? Okay. There we go, there's a D. So if we were singing this train, or I have a nose, you have a nose, we have noses, nose, 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 right? That's in D major. Nose, 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 nose. Then we have seen 10-day-old babies going ah, ah, ah. So they're singing on a D, or ah on the A, either the first or the fifth note of the scale that we're singing. We've seen that happen. Then let's say we shift to a song that's in E, right? There we go. So we're singing wasn't Hine Matov?
Yes, ma'am. Oh, Hine Matov. Yeah, I didn't sing it in that key, but
all right. Right. So we're in E. The baby who was just toning on D a second ago will shift and start singing, toning on E. And it's not intentional, right? It's not something that is purposeful in any way, but what it tells us is that their infant brain, 10-day-old brain, is taking in the music information, processing it, and then the physical apparatus that will ultimately become a singing voice is able to match it. In the same way that babies, when we speak to them when they're very young, you'll see them try, you can see their mouths working, and you just like, you go, oh, I bet they're trying to make my sound. And even though it doesn't make any sense that an infant would be trying to do anything, it's an automatic reflexive response. And like Lynne was saying, if that's a hiking trail, if that's a pathway in the brain where they're starting to make sounds and tones, and we are echoing them back, or we are reinforcing them, that's going to reinforce that. And that pitch association and recognition and whatever is going to become stronger as they get older. But it doesn't just happen in infancy. It also happens lifelong. Anytime we have a music experience of any kind, the brain is lit up and our brain is absorbing that music information and taking it in, and we can ultimately be able to process it and make something with it, even if, right, Lynne, even if we think we can't. We have a cultural misunderstanding, and we were talking about this a little bit before we started, about who has it and who doesn't in terms of singing or dancing or playing music. That, oh, I can't sing, I can't carry a tune, I don't have it, I didn't get the dancing gene, I didn't get the singing gene, whatever that was. And we're saying that this is a modern construction, that before recorded music, we didn't make distinctions about who could and couldn't. We just did, right? Who read the Little House on the Prairie books? Anybody read the Little House on the Prairie? Okay, so let me just tell you, this family, like, they were in the middle of Wisconsin in the middle of the winter in nowhere, and there was like a barn dance happening about 100 miles away, and they like strapped on their shoes and their sleds, and they like hiked in the woods in the snow for like 2 days to get to the barn dance. That's how important it was. And they went and they danced as a community, and there was nobody there who said, oh, I just have 2 left feet. Like that's just not kind of how we were constructed. Pa took his fiddle down at the end of every day, and he fiddled while the girls danced, and then they cleaned their socks and they did things, right? So it's just kind of how we lived. And there are those of us here, I remember being a little person where we would go to grandma's house and grandma would play the piano, and we would gather around the piano and sing. And does anybody remember, anybody have things like this that happen where they would gather around? Right. We just don't do that as much now because of recorded music, because we have a perfect example of what music should be out here. And by the way, it's been shaped digitally within an inch of its life, so that the music that we hear on the radio actually has very little similarity to what the music was made in the how the singing sounded in the recording studio. It's just been shaped and tweaked and whatever. So now we have this unattainable goal of perfection that we compare our singing voice to, or that we compare our dancing to, and we say, well, I shouldn't do that. Somebody else is going to do that because they're the ones who have it and I don't have it. We can think of it in a different way. One of the things that we can think about, and Lynne, I know you have something to say, so I'm going to let you talk in a second. I'm going to let you talk in a second. But so one of the things that we can think about is, so music is not only something that we do, but it's a way of understanding and decoding the world around us. It's a way of knowing. It's a way of being. It's part of being human. And we have such strong neurological evidence to show that this is the case. One of them is talking about how we take in auditory information. One of the things that we know from research now is that when we hear a song or we hear a sound wave, and let's say that the sound wave has this shape, as our auditory cortex is processing that sound wave, we are not only lighting up that part of the brain, but that part of the brain is oscillating at the same wave as the sound coming in. So our brain is actually making a shape inside that matches the shape of the sound outside. And if you, researchers have actually done taken an EEG recording of the brain action when a song is playing, and then they take that drawing and they feed it back through software, and that software then decodes the drawing of the brain waves and plays it out loud, and it's the music. So we're not only just hearing music, but we are actually making a representation of music that matches it identically. That's changing our biochemistry, right? That's changing the shape of our brain waves in the moment. And so which is one of the reasons why when we hear somebody speaking and we hear that they're angry, one of the reasons why we know that is because our brain is processing the sound waves. His brain is processing that anger sound wave, processing it, making a representation of it in the brain, processing it through all the emotional filters. We are remarkable at how we can hear songs, either music that we would think of as music on the radio, or the song of our partner who is sad, or the song of our boss who is angry. We have a way of understanding and decoding the music that's in language and the music that's in emotional interactions in a way that we're just starting to scratch the surface of understanding what that is. Lynn, go. Keep talking.
So 2 things. I want to go back a little bit, and then I want to meet Anne where she just took us, because it's really awesome. So going back, research has shown, so we all know in the world there are people who don't read, who can't read. The people who can't read, mostly it means that they haven't been taught how. There is a very, very tiny part of the human population whose brains are constructed in a way that they are not able to learn how to read. Research has shown that the same is true with music, that there is a very, very small amount of the population whose brains are constructed where they're not able to make music. However, what Anne was saying, we do not experience music in our culture as much. We listen to it. That's the ideal. That's the perfection. We can't match that. We stopped singing with our children because we're afraid of how we sound. We stopped going to grandma's house and playing piano and sitting around in a circle. So there is scientifically a very, 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 very small number of people who really cannot make music. What happens is your development gets stunted. Your musical growth gets stunted by society and by all that. So that's what I wanted to say. The other thing is that Anne's talking about the brain waves matching. I want to invite you to think about prayer and Jewish prayer. Lots of our prayers are chanted, intoned, basically sung. So one thing that reminds me of is when we read Torah, right? So we have someone get up and chant or sing Torah on our behalf. And while we are a part of that music making experience, our brain waves are matching the brain waves of the sound that we're hearing. Also, in a community, when we are making music together, our heart rates sync up, our breathing syncs up, our brains individually and collectively release all these kinds of hormones, oxytocin being one, all these neurochemicals. So when that person is singing or chanting Torah, we are all experiencing that. It's as if we are as well. Another thing I want to ask you to remember is the vidui on Yom Kippur. We have sinned. We have done this sin. We have done that sin. We have done this sin. And our tradition tells us that we say we, because even though I might not have committed adultery, there's probably someone in the room with me who has. And so we are all as one appealing to God and to God's mercy, because as we're singing, right, neuroscience has supported that, right? Our tradition, thousands of years of tradition say that we are one, we are in a community. If I didn't commit one specific sin, someone else may have. We're still all in the same boat. While we are chanting those prayers, neuroscience has shown that we are one unit. Our brains are matching. I'm losing my oomph, but it's so exciting. It's so thrilling for me to talk about it. So Anne, save me.
No, well, actually, one of the things that I love is that we have, this is something that we have known culturally for centuries, right? We have known spiritually that making music as a community brings us closer together, that it cements our bond with each other as a community. It cements our understanding of spiritual text, of spiritual meaning. It does something remarkable. There's a transformation that happens in religious experience because there is music there. And it's so interesting that it now takes neuroscientists with labs and machines to be able to prove what is obvious, right? Which we know. And of course, that's how the human condition is, right? There are things that we know, and then we go through the Industrial Revolution and we forget things, and then we have to be reminded that they exist. And this musical connection is one of those things. So here's a little bit of evidence that I find remarkable. If a whole bunch of people go to the Metropolitan Opera and they sit and they are like, I'm here to experience this opera, and it's like men and women and young and old and from this country and other countries, whatever, everybody comes in, they've got their own stuff going on. As they experience this opera, their heart rates will synchronize, their brain waves will synchronize, their breathing rates will synchronize, so that if you've got a heart monitor, a brain monitor, whatever on people, you start to see that everything starts to be in sync. And that's, to me, that's like mind blowing. It's one of those things where I say, okay, I understand that that's happening, but I don't understand why that's happening. And that's the thing about music, is we don't need to understand why it's happening. We just need to say, oh, this is happening. But it's one of those pieces of evidence that lets us know that music isn't just something to enjoy every now and then, but it has a power. It has like a superpower, an emotional and neurological superpower. Listen, and when your kids, your grandkids, whoever, are teeny tiny, just making music around them, the great thing is that they learn and develop music the way they learn and develop language, by just hearing it. It's just an immersive experience. But that doesn't mean that those of us who didn't have that, or who have what we were talking about earlier, childhood musical injuries, it doesn't mean that music is off limits, right? Or not something that's available to us. It's always available to us. Our hiking trails may not be as well established, but it's still available. For anybody who says to me, oh, well, I can't sing, I try and I really can't sing. I say, so if you were in a wheelchair for 20 years and never used your legs, and somebody said, get up and run a race, you wouldn't be able to do it, right? If you have been for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, where you just don't really sing that much because your 8th grade choir teacher said you should be in the audience while we sing. So what that did is that just went, whoop, I'm not going to use this. I might sing in the car every now and then, but I'm not really going to use this instrument. And then I said, okay, now sing a song. It's going to be rough. It's going to be like getting up out of a chair that you haven't used your legs for 20 years and running a race, right? That is when we can give ourselves grace, when the outside world doesn't necessarily give us grace, because they don't understand what we know. But I can tell you that unless someone here is one of the incredibly small, less than 1% of the population has some kind of congenital neurological shift that means that they are not able to learn music, it's basically almost no one has that. Unless you are one of those people, you can totally sing and you can totally move and you can totally play something. But as adults, we think of us as like, well, I need to sing like Beyonce, right? Or I need to dance like Fred Astaire. It's like, no. We just need to be ourselves, and we need to be like, have the permission to play around, which is not something that we tend to give ourselves.
So, Anne, I'm gonna call a moment here, because there's a lot to take in.
Sorry.
And no.
I warned you.
And you sing your words. I mean, I think it's great, with lots of energy. And I'm just wondering, because you a few times you said, so think about when, or think about, and of course, I was thinking about every folk concert I've been to where I sing terribly, and my husband pokes me. But I'm just wondering, and there he is. I was just wondering if there was some reflection on that. And there is one comment in the chat. David, do you want to? I see a couple.
Yeah, my brother, I'm the oldest of 4. My brother is 6 years younger. He is classically trained pianist. He is a published composer. He is infuriatingly good at learning languages. He decided to teach himself Korean so he can talk to the local dry cleaner. He and my sister-in-law went to Italy. So 2 weeks before they left, he taught himself conversational Italian. I hate him. So you spoke earlier about the connection between language and music. So can you expound on that a little bit?
Lynn, can I talk
Go
first?
for it.
Okay. So language acquisition and music acquisition are similar, but not the same. And so one of the things is that music is processed in language areas in the brain, but also in other areas where language is processed solely in language areas, almost exclusively. It is hard to know if his aptitude for language and his aptitude for music, or aptitude is the potential to learn something with which we're born, right? So we are all born with aptitudes for everything: math, running, music, languages, all kinds of things. He may have been born with a very high aptitude for language acquisition and a very high aptitude for music, and therefore that's how they dovetail. He, as a result of those aptitudes, and he as a result of using music and as part of his life, it's likely that he strengthened the language parts of his brain at the same time because of that, because he had music in his life.
Right.
If he didn't have music and he still had a high language acquisition aptitude, probably still would be able to do this, learning Korean to talk to his dry cleaner, which love that idea. Could never do that. But that, so I think I would guess, not knowing anything about anything, I would guess that the music oomphed the language aptitude, which he was already born. That's what I would guess. Yeah.
Okay, now, can you tell me who his father is? Because this is a unique
David,
trait
that's
in the family.
personal. Go away. I want to go back. There was another comment, Fern.
Yeah.
Fern, you can turn on your camera. You want to speak, or do you want me to read your comment? There she is.
Hi, Fern.
Hello. No, I said as a kid, I attempted and took guitar lessons for a couple of years.
Yeah.
I took cello lessons for several years. When it came to, okay, now everyone has to try out for one of the music groups. Yeah, I was one of the 17 in the whole school rejected.
Oh gosh, it's awful.
So, no, I think I'm one of those. You're a very, very small percentage.
So I will say probably not, because the people who are in that very small percentage don't even attempt music and don't even attempt singing, because they literally can't hear difference in pitch.
I
literally
can't. Oh no, that's one of,
Okay,
actually,
I have a question. So Fern, do you listen to music?
So I want to change this. I can hear a little bit difference in pitch. I could never match it in a million years.
That makes sense.
Like when you do that tone D or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Look, but can I tell you something? Hearing that D and matching that pitch is an advanced, complex skill. And that's the thing that seems seems irrational, right? Like, you hear a pitch, you sing in the pitch, but we see people do that on American Idol all the time. They see the voice, we see that, you see it in children, right? But it's actually an incredibly complex skill to be able to hear a pitch and be able to match that pitch. Those of us who do it with ease were lucky enough to have an environment when we were young, genetics that come into a place, right? But that combination of nature and nurture that supported the natural unfolding of that. I'm going to give you an example that doesn't relate to music. My husband, right, when he looks at a color, he's not colorblind. He's fully color seeing, but it's only been in the last 5 years that he's been able to tell the difference between this blue, this gray, and this green. Right. So we would be out at a store and I would say, pick up that blue jacket. And he would be like, you mean this gray one? I was like, okay, that's the blue jacket. That's the gray jacket. And that's the green jacket. They all looked like the same color to him. But once once I schooled my husband in what is accurate about color. So he's actually, his eyes have changed. And what it is it's his brain has changed. His brain has created slots where they didn't exist before for this particular shade of blue and this shade of gray and this shade of green that are actually different, but before looked the same to him. It's not that he couldn't see those differences, it's that his brain hadn't learned to. And now my mother is a painter. And so for my mother, she would be like, not only are those 3 colors, but there are 100 others that you're not seeing. Like the dust on the floor is a different color and the thing in the tree is a different, it's remarkable how the brain changes as we are given more information and opportunity to practice. Lynne, you have probably seen in class, right? Parents who come in and say, like they come into the first time of class with their kid and they're like, well, I can't sing. But then over semesters, they go from not being able to sing in tune to be able to sing in tune. You've seen that happen in class.
Yeah.
And they just come once a week to class.
Yeah, no. And what I wanted to say was it's practice. Well, you were going to talk, Anne, about reception and expression. But what we need, I'm just going to go in for it. You can finish it. We need an environment where we can experience music, where we can receive it, where we can catch it. And then we need an environment where we can play, we can express it, we can turn what we're hearing and what we're ingesting and what we're processing, turn it into expression. And that needs an environment that does not say to a 4-year-old, oh, you're not singing that right, you can't sing. That means an environment where you do not say to an 8-year-old, who sings that song? Bruce Springsteen. Well, let him sing it because you can't. I mean, these things create very strong emotions and very strong feelings, and they affect our physical, emotional, and neurological development. So I would say to you, Fern, that you haven't been in an environment that supports your musical babbling, right? We all get it in terms of language. I say this in my classes almost every day. Your child does not come out of the womb saying, I want a cookie. Your child comes out of the womb saying, and the mother and the grandparents and the babysitter say, oh, do you want a cookie? And the child goes, oh, do you want a cookie? They reinforce it. Like Anne said, they return that serve. And it's an environment where the child is free to express what they've ingested. And again, with music, there's a lot of emotional baggage, a lot of music trauma that people carry. And then add to that the lack of environment and support. Add to that the fact that we're listening to Beyonce, and we're listening to Barbara Streisand, and we're listening to all these people who have incredibly gifted instruments, right? And we can't compare to that. That's not right. But in the indigenous societies in in Australia, nobody says I can't sing. They just make music together. So
Lynne,
right.
I want to build on what you were talking about, because Fern and I probably fall in the same class of music wannabes. We see this with adult learners all the time compared to children. If you watch an adult try to learn to ski versus a child gets on the skis, falls down, starts again. An adult gets on the skis and looks foolish, falls down, doesn't try again. Yeah. Because adults are conscious of being inept. And so I will let Ken speak for himself in a minute. So the self-consciousness as an adult to try and learn, we call it, when we do learning, adult learning, we call it that period of conscious incompetence. Yes. And that is that painful learning time, right? Yep. Kids don't have conscious incompetence until we teach them to have that. And then you go to conscious competence, and at some point you get to mastery, but that's a very hard road to go. Ken had a comment. So Ken, why don't you?
Can I, before we do Ken's comment, Shirley, just let me say that in an early childhood framing, we say that children are about process and not product. And at a certain point it flips and we become about product. Right. So as soon as if I'm trying to draw a tree and it doesn't look like a tree, I'm like, to heck with it. I'm not going to draw that anymore. Where kids are like, I'm going to draw something, and for 3 years they'll draw something that they say is a tree, and you're like, oh, okay. So, but they don't even think about it. But it's in that process, it's in that time where they're in the process that they're actually learning to refine their stroke and their pressure and their all that stuff, so that eventually when somebody teaches them the right way, using an adult framing, to draw a tree, they have all of these practice basic skills. And that's the same thing with music. Once you have those basic skills that you've practiced and don't care about what they sound like, then you can be 50 and try to learn the flute, and you have more to bring to it. But you also have to bring that child mind, right? That willingness to have it sound like awful for a year, right? And just to try, and who cares how it sounds, and who cares if you don't like it? Go put your headphones on if you don't like it, right? And we don't tend to give ourselves that grace. That's
right.
exactly.
No, that's a very rough time for us. Ken, tell us about the Chinese.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess I have 3 comments. Number 1 is this is fantastic. I really love it. And the only reason why I take the video off is I'm trying to make myself dinner as I'm listening. But and just to speak to your comment before I get to my other comment, is that I remember I started playing an instrument when I was about 8 years old, and I remember going back maybe in high school, going to a grammar school and listening to a concert, and I'm saying to myself, only a motherly love could listen to this. And so when you don't know how bad you are, you progress. You really do progress, and it was really so I certainly agree with what you're saying. But I was listening to Radio Lab. Some people have heard that. So they were talking about perfect pitch, and they said that there's a percentage of America. I do not have perfect pitch. I don't even know if I have good relative pitch, but the percentage of Americans who have perfect pitch and the percentage of Chinese who have perfect pitch, and it's a higher percentage. And what they were relating it to was the Chinese language, because the same word can have a totally different meaning depending upon the pitch that you use. So these people are much more attuned to pitch. So I'm just kind of agreeing that the environment, I mean, there's natural ability and there's effort, and you said, environment as well.
Oh, for sure.
We've brought that study up in class all the time. And in class, in our music together classes with families, we have songs, and we also have chants. We have, here is the beehive, but where are the bees? And we try to explain to adults that even if you think you can't sing, if you have musical baggage, you can say this chant with inflection and practice using your voice without judging yourself that you're not on pitch, right? But we've in America, we talk like this. We have our newscaster voice, and we don't vary our pitch, and it's a low pitch, and it goes on and on and on and on. And in the Chinese, exactly like what you say, you say, I don't speak Mandarin, but ba, 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 they all mean different things. It's the same sound, it's just a different pitch. So absolutely that makes an effect. And then to sort of tag on to what we're talking about older adults, that you can again retrain yourself. You can create sideways pathways, right? You have a lot of overgrowth in your forest path, but you can create sort of shortcut to shortcut to shortcut, and by doing things, by exercising your vocal cords, by giving yourself permission to sing in the shower, by all that stuff. So yeah, I love that you brought that up, because we use that in class all the time.
So Lynn, I have 2 other people who want to share their voice. So I'm going to go to Liza and then to Geraldine. And Sarita put a comment in. So Liza, you want to tell your story? We know your dad.
Yeah. So when my dad got sick with metastatic melanoma, he had brain tumors, and his brain tumors prevented him from speaking. Lost his ability to talk. You'd ask him, Dad, how do you feel? And he just looked at you blankly, as if I didn't know whether he even heard me. There was no response. But weirdly, my dad was not a very religious man, but our idea of being religious was going to synagogue on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But I guess I started meeting him at the hospital with my sister-in-law, and it was a Friday night, and we sang we're like, it's Friday night, and she's religious. I'm like, wouldn't we say the prayers over the candles? And we sang, like he knew the very simple prayers, and he could say the prayers with us. And the one song, it was really interesting, Ose Shalom. He loved that song, which had more of a melody than the prayers. And when we sang it, he would light up. And so when you talk about the connectivity of music, and literally the day before my dad died, he and my siblings didn't believe. I'm like, we were all sitting around his bed and nobody believed, because he was just sitting there like blankly. And I came in the room and I sat down on the bed next to him and I said, I'm going to sing with Dad. And they thought I was insane. And lo and behold, I started singing Ose Shalom, and he began to sing, but was happy. Like I actually saw joy. And so it's really interesting in terms of parts of the brain, and I felt connected to my dad in a very profound way.
Oh, that's awesome.
Thanks.
It's like redundancies, right? We hear this in corporate America all the time, right? Or like computer stuff. We have redundancies so that if this thing goes down, this other one, this circuit goes down, this circuit will be there to catch it. And if that circuit goes down, this one will be there to catch it. And that's how I feel. I have a friend who's a music therapist and works primarily with Alzheimer's patients. And she's like, music gives the brain tons of redundancies so that when one part goes down, Liza, right, the other parts can come in and serve. And thank goodness he had that, right? So and thank goodness that you thought to light candles that one time and discover, right? It's like a miracle. Just
So it was as if it was a miracle. It was a beautiful thing.
Geraldine had a comment she wanted to make.
You're muted. You're muted.
We should make a muted song. You're muted.
There you go.
First of all, in relation to what Liza just said, that's part of the reason why people in synagogue who may not be able to read all of the prayers get upset when we change the tune that we use for a different song.
Yeah.
It sounds totally different. That's my first thing. My second thing I wanted to say was that when I was in college, I was taking a course and we went to a school for emotionally disturbed blind children.
Wow.
And the only way the teachers were able and the parents were able to communicate with the children was by music and by singing with them. And the third thing I wanted to say was that I started taking violin lessons when I was 5 years old, and I still play. And my music teacher, who was Greek, but was trained in Russia, Mr. Kambarakis, was very strict. And we didn't have a piano in our house, but everybody in my house sang. My father, my mother had a beautiful soprano voice. My brother plays 2 instruments. And I still play the violin, although since I've stopped taking lessons when I was, I guess, after college and haven't played as much now, it's sort of at a plateau. But Mr. Kambarakis, at the end of every lesson, knowing I was a violinist and that I would ultimately be playing probably in an orchestra, sat me down next to him and he played a chord. And he said to me, so I want you to sing the highest note and the lowest note. And as that time developed after each lesson, then he would say, I want you to listen and sing the note next to the highest note and next to the lowest note. And then he would play a 10-note chord and do the same thing. And that's how he trained my ear to listen and to learn. But it's a problem because at the end of this whole episode, he said, you have almost perfect pitch. and whatever that means. And but I'm able to pick out the sound. When I go to a performance, I can pick out the music that the oboist is playing, or the flautist is playing, or the second violinist is playing. But the thing that is difficult is when I'm singing, well, I'll use the example in shul, and somebody sings out of tune, and it's like somebody taking a fingernail on the chalkboard.
Yeah.
And that's the hard part for me.
Yeah, I know.
I won't sit next to you, Carolyn.
Or Fern.
Well, guys, we are at a point where we have to end. See, and you said you'd come back for at Nourish.
Part 2, 3, 4.
Part 2, 3, 4. We might have to do that, and maybe at some point we will actually be able to do it in person and sing together.
Can I say one? I'll say one kind of summing up.
I'll give you the closing.
And Geraldine made me think about, because Geraldine, you said a whole bunch of things, and so go back to one of the first things that you said, and it's and Lynne said this, touched on this earlier, is that our brains are wired as tools to receive information and process it before we put it out. And there's a comment, Dale, no, not Dale, but Dale, Sarita's made a comment about language learners. It's very similar, of learning like a second language, very similar thing happens. Our brains as tools are wired to receive information and take that information and make sense of it and find the patterns in it and make room for it, make pathways in it before we are able to then do something outward with it. That even resembles something that might be musical, or might be a language, or might be, and so it is a risk to make to take stabs at something that feels, dangerous in some way. And one of the reasons is because we need to just respect that our brains need to take things in. When we think about new melodies or new tunes to, prayers that we're used to having in one way, one of the things that we need is lots of deep exposure to that new, so that we can make sense of it, so that it doesn't feel quite so scary before we try it. Same thing with a language. We need to, or a new song that we listen to, or new anything, need to give ourselves time to receive it without any expectation that we will get it right, or that we will understand it or anything, but just allow ourselves to take it in. And that's, I just want to say, this is a lesson that I learned through music, but I take it into all parts of my life. When there's an idea that's new, when I'm trying to see something new for the first time, when I'm, when somebody brings an idea that wasn't mine to me, and I'm like, that's not what I had in mind. I'm like, I gotta receive it. I gotta take it in. I gotta let it percolate, and and if I had one thing that I would like to leave here with is I want to just give everybody permission for music and wherever else to let it come in, and just let us process it and be with it before we try to do something that sounds good or makes sense. And as we're trying to then do something where it sounds good, understanding that it's going to be rocky before it sounds even remotely like it's supposed to sound, like it feels even remotely like it's supposed to feel, like it looks even remotely like it's supposed to look, because that is how we are wired as human beings to be, even though we have a cultural understanding that we should be good at something right off the bat, or we're not good at it at all. So that's kind of my parting words, I would say.
Thank you. Those are great parting words. Thank you very much. And
Thank you, Anne.
We'll do it
Thank
again.
you.
Lynne,
I would like to do this again.
Yeah,
I
I'm
can't
game.
So,
All right. Well, we're gonna do it in person. We're
Yeah,
gonna turn us all into musical beings.
Yeah, next time we'll sing more.
Yes.
And thank you, Lynn, for bringing in and for the two of you bringing this to us. Thank you.
Oh, thank you
guys.
Thank
Be
for
well.
inviting us. Thank you so much.
Thank
This has
you,
been
guys.
wonderful. I've had a great time. Thank you.
Thank you. This was great.
Bye. All right,
Thank you.
Adrian, it's up to you now.
Okay. Thank you so much. That was amazing. All right. I'm going to stop recording.